Welcome everyone to the March Canada Wildfire webinar. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So not only are we on a different date, we're not on our second Friday, we're on the first day of the month, but we have a really neat project that was brought to us for us to help facilitate the sharing. So today we're going to be talking about, sorry about this, I realize I'm on the wrong slide here, about increasing Bolivian fire management capacity through the Canadian Technical Assistance Partnership. And today we have two great presenters with us. We have Jane Park and Mike May. Before I hand over the presentation to them for them to tell us about this neat project they've been working with, I would like to first acknowledge that I am located in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory. And I'm very thankful to be able to live, play, and work in this location. And thankful for the people who have come before us who have taken such good care of this land. So I'd like people to also take a moment to think about the places that you live and recreate and where you work, and pay a little bit of homage just take a moment to pay some homage to the people who came before us and the respect that they have for the land and the respect that we also should show to the land. So today we're going to also do a little different with our Q&A. Instead of holding all the questions to the end, our presenters are happy to have questions throughout their presentation. A quick reminder that this presentation is recorded. So you have two options to post questions. If you would like to remain anonymous, you can post your questions in the chat box and we'll monitor it and check it throughout the presentation. The other option is you can choose to put your hand up and unmute and ask your question when called upon. So with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Jane Park. Jane, you're good to go.
Sounds good. Good morning, everybody. I may know some of you and others welcome. My name is Jane Park, and right now I am speaking to you from Calgary, which is in the traditional territories of the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, from the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina and the Yahé Nations, Yahé Nakota Nations, and the Métis Nation Region 3. I just want to acknowledge that I am the daughter of immigrants to this land and fortunate to live and work here. And I also wanted to acknowledge the numerous Indigenous peoples of Bolivia, whose land I was fortunate enough to visit and from whom I learned so much about their culture and stewardship of the land. So today I'm going to be speaking to you about a project that Mike May and I have been working on this winter. It's a project that seeks to increase Bolivian fire management capacity through technical assistance from Canada. Both of us will be presenting. We'll start with a bit of an overview of what this project is, and then we'll kind of take turns explaining each part of the project that we're working on and kind of end the presentation, coming back together on how our projects link together with other kind of themes as well as our next steps. Next slide, please. So the project that Mike and I are working on is part of what's called the Technical Assistance Partnership Expert Deployment Mechanism. This is a project that's funded by Global Affairs Canada and implemented by Alinea International. Basically, it's the main goal is to support poverty reduction in countries around the world. And it's part of Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy. Basically, how it works is that national government entities in a variety of other countries request technical assistance from Canada. And then through Alinea International, Canadian so-called experts are recruited for whatever topic they've been requested for, and then provide that technical assistance. If you just click on the screen, quickly show where Bolivia. So this project was initiated by 4 national government entities in Bolivia who were requesting assistance for wildfire management capacity building in Bolivia. Next slide. So why were they asking for assistance? So wildfires in Bolivia have been on the increase, like a lot of places in the world. In Bolivia, they have a lot of forest, given that they are not a large country. They're about Canada is about 9 times the size of Bolivia. They have 57.2 million hectares of forest, and of that, 37.1 million hectares is what they call primary forest, which is the most biodiverse and carbon dense form of forest. Many of their forest ecosystems are sensitive to fire and not fire adapted. The Amazon and some of their dry tropical forests. But then they also do have some fire adapted ecosystems like grasslands and savannas. Just like a lot of other places, they have increasing impacts from climate change. They're currently in quite a strong drought period, even though it's supposed to be their wet season. And there's an increased prevalence of human-caused fires due to land clearing and agricultural processes. So a lot of rural communities are clearing forests for agricultural land, for pasture land, for cattle, and those fires are escaping into more of their adjacent forests and impacting biodiversity. In 2019 and 2020, they had a massive fire year with over 1.4 million hectares burning. And that really kind of highlighted some of the capacity and institutional challenges that they had down there. Next slide. Next slide, please. So this project was initiated, as I mentioned, from 4 separate national government entities in Bolivia. First is the Ministry of Environment and Water. I'll refer to them as MMAyA. They are similar to Environment Canada in terms of a department that's responsible for environment and water. The second one is the National Protected Area Service, or what I'll refer to as SERNAP. They are similar to Parks Canada, so they manage protected areas within Bolivia. And then the side that Mike is working on, which he'll talk about later, is the Vice Ministry of Civil Defense and the Joint Command for Reaction to Adverse Emergencies of the Armed Forces, which he'll refer to as the CC-REA. Next slide. So the objective of the overall project is to enhance the Bolivian public sector's capacity to manage and respond more effectively to forest fires, including local firefighting brigades, early warning and monitoring systems, and aerial firefighting. Next slide. They also are looking for assistance with preparedness, forest fire management, contingency planning, early warning and monitoring systems, and climate change adaptation. And obviously on my side of the project, they're really focused on protected areas and Indigenous territories. They also are looking for assistance with local firefighting brigades and park rangers to be deployed on the ground in protected areas and key areas of Bolivia. And then also using specialized equipment such as aircraft and other tools for firefighting. Next slide. So who are we? Some of you know us. I'll start with myself and then hand it over to Mike. So I'm Jane Park. I have 20 years of fire and vegetation management experience in protected areas in Canada. My job outside of this contract, which I've taken a leave from, is with Parks Canada as the fire and vegetation specialist for Parks Canada. I've specialized in fire restoration, ecology, wildfire management, and native vegetation management. And I am one of the 5 incident commanders for our national incident management teams since about 2016. And over to you, Mike, just to introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from. Mike May. As Jane, I likely know some of you, and nice to speak to everyone. So yeah, I have well over 15 years of wildland fire experience. Worked for the Alberta government in wildfire management. Just recently actually took on a new role. I was one of the provincial training specialists at our training center in Hinton, and just took on a new role as provincial aircraft specialists for the province. I kind of specialize in fire investigation, aircraft management, also ignition, both ground ignition and aerial ignition. And like Jane, I'm one of the 2 incident commanders for Alberta's provincial incident management teams this year. Back to you, Jane.
Great, thanks. And next slide. So how the project works, basically, we got brought on, I was brought on in December, I think maybe Mike around the same time or maybe slightly earlier. And off the hop, you know, lots of groundwork to learn more about Bolivia, about their fire management systems. And then pretty quickly in the new year in January, both Mike and I went down to Bolivia to conduct what we call the needs assessment. And I'll go a bit into what that process is. So basically that beginning part in January was to figure out what exactly the technical assistant needs were from the 4 government entities, to talk with them, to talk with personnel on the ground, understand the realities, and then figure out what types of technical assistance and training we could develop. And then we came back to Canada, and then we've spent the last very short month developing as much training material as we can to fit their needs. And then very soon I'll be leaving in just over a week to go back to Bolivia to deliver the training. Next slide, please. So that initial needs assessment trip, one of the main things that we did was a competency assessment. Essentially, we were assessing relevant competencies related to wildfire management and the kind of overall project targets with all the folks on the ground. So it's a 2-part process. There's like a written survey where Mike and I identified certain areas of baseline knowledge, like knowledge in incident management for wildfires, or coordination of resources, or the use of hand tools, the use of fire management strategies and tactics. And folks were asked to assess themselves on what knowledge they had at that time, so prior to the technical assistance. And then it was followed up with focus group discussions to discuss the competencies in more detail so that we could gather more information as to exactly kind of what they know about each of the competencies and where gaps might occur. And the results of that assessment and that needs assessment trip feed into the training that we would develop once we got back to Canada. So the survey, you can kind of see there, you don't have to read it all, but essentially it was sent out, in my case, to all the park rangers in many of the different protected areas, and they would fill that out, they would assess themselves, and then I would compile the information, you know, what park they were from, what level of education do they have, what is their level of experience, and then what they rate themselves as. And so I had just color coded in the spreadsheet. In the green ones, those are places where folks felt fairly comfortable, they had good experience, they had training. And then in some of the yellow areas there, those are aspects that maybe they have less experience in. So essentially we could do that. And then as we had those conversations, we could narrow down what topics we would be training folks on. Next slide. So I'll start with my needs assessment trip, and then I'll hand it over to Mike. So for me, I was working with SERNAP and MMAyA, so the Protected Area Service and the Ministry of Environment and Water. Mostly I met with the SERNAP folks, so the people similar to park wardens or park rangers in Canada. I was meeting with park rangers in Bolivia. So I was really fortunate to visit 5 protected areas: Tarakia Flora and Fauna National Reserve, Agua Agre National Park and Integrated Management Area, Amboro National Park, and it's also an integrated management area, Anmi El Palmar, and Tunari National Park. And so I should mention here that SERNAP has a number of different types of protected areas that are kind of represented there. They have flora and fauna national reserves, which focus on specific flora and fauna species to protect them. They have national parks similar to Canada, where the protection is very high. They have legislation that protects all of the ecosystems and all of the components there. And then they have what they call ANMI, so integrated management natural areas, or like the acronym is ANMI. And those are areas where there's limited sustainable development and natural resource extraction and usage by local Indigenous communities or local communities in those areas. And there are also protected Indigenous areas as well. So it's a really interesting context of protected area management that, as a person working for Parks Canada, it could take home a lot of good information as well. Next slide, please. So what they told me, so through all my meetings, a lot of those protected areas are very different. Some of them are directly adjacent to communities. Others are very remote. Many of them have local rural communities or Indigenous communities within them. And it was very clear to me once I started speaking to the rangers that they had a really good understanding of basic and intermediate firefighting techniques. They explained to me a lot of their strategies and tactics of like bringing the fire to natural features, doing burnout operations, using hand tools, all the rest of it. They understood suppression strategies and tactics, as well as the use of their tools. And they had a good understanding of potential hazards from fire behavior to kind of the types of terrain and fatigue issues that they might have. And if you go to the next slide, please. Some of the really big challenges that were expressed to me in all 5 of the areas was the difficulty of access. So just like in Canada, but probably more extreme, they've got very mountainous terrain, very thick vegetation, lack of roadways and access. But unlike Canada, they don't have very much access to aircraft either. So they are walking into most of these areas. If you just click on the slide, a red polygon should show up. So that red polygon, actually, it's hard to tell because of the contrast, but is where a fire occurred approximately a year and a bit ago in Amboro National Park. We were standing kind of on an adjacent mountain. There's a giant river canyon below us, and that was an area that they needed to access. There's very sensitive habitat. There's endangered species in there. And so you can imagine what the access would be like having to walk there. Many of their fires, they're walking upwards of 20 kilometers straight uphill, taking 4 to 5 hours to get to the site where they're going to start actioning fires. They also have a lack of communication, so no radios. Basically, in many of the parks, they do use line of sight radio communication and cellular service, and they do have much better cellular service than Canada. And so when I hiked 20 kilometers into one of the parks, I had cell service the whole way, which was neat. But in many other places, they don't have cell service either. So they're working off of line of sight and or no communication. They also lack logistical support. So everything that they carry on their backs when they go to the fire, including their food, usually a backpack, water bladder, and a machete is what they have to work with. Aircraft is usually days or away or not available, and they lack PPE. When they do get aircraft, many of the pilots in Bolivia are inexperienced with firefighting techniques, so they are not effective. So they're bucketing, with short lines from very high off the ground, and the water is not penetrating very high canopies. Their trees there are massive, and they are not being used to move personnel or equipment. And so, that logistical support is a huge one. And they also are kind of not sure what emerging technologies there are these days to assist with managing fires as well. You can go to the next slide, please. So they were looking for potential better strategies for prevention. So a lot of, as I mentioned, the fires are started from rural communities, and they're looking for better educational strategies and mitigation strategies to work with the communities and educate the communities. And then because of their sensitive ecosystems, the photo in the right-hand corner is of an endemic palm. It only grows in Bolivia and particularly in El Palmar and Miel Palmar. So that's where we walk to, and those burned for kind of the first time in their known history. And so impacts on these sensitive species are relatively unknown. So they were looking for assistance to understand fire effects on sensitive species, and then, what they could do to monitor and gather information so that they can feed that information into restoration planning and reforestation. And the photo on the bottom, you can see a very large city, that's Cochabamba, and that's where Tunari National Park is. and basically they have a giant community there, and then the national park also is in an area that represents the watershed for most of the drinking water in that area. While we were there, actually the fire that you see in the middle photo started. And so there was a response, and I was able to see some of the tools that they had in terms of a remote camera and equipment and drones that they had. But it was interesting to see that. Next slide, please. Okay. And then some of the other challenges, because the park rangers do have a fair bit of on-the-ground fire knowledge, they are often working with resources that are less prepared and less trained. So they get a lot of community volunteers, community members, or the military assists. And many of those folks don't have the same level of experience. And so they're trying to action the fire, but also deal with these untrained personnel in, rugged terrain with fires. And so trying to manage those types of resources, they just didn't have some of the leadership training that we may get in Canada. So they were looking for that kind of need, and then coordinating with external resources from both the military and the CC-REA. And Mike will let you know more about the CC-REA, but it's a newly formed arm of the government. And so understanding how best to work with those folks for the most effective fire management. Next slide, please. So the training that I've kind of spent February developing, there's 5 key areas that have been requested from SERNAP and MMAyA. The first is that mid-level operational leadership training. So training for the experienced park rangers so that they can lead groups of less trained people like the communities and the military. Incident organizational training. So some of their logistical challenges are that the park rangers themselves are the ones trying to deal with logistics and operations and planning and everything while being the ones on the ground. And as you can imagine, without a lot of communication, it's really difficult to manage an incident and get ahead in terms of forward proactive planning. As I mentioned, there's lots of sensitive ecosystems and endangered species. So they are looking for some post-fire impact monitoring tools and protocols. And then, any information on emerging technology for wildfire prevention, detection, monitoring, and management. And then lastly, wildfire prevention and mitigation. So in terms of educating communities and mitigation actions, such as, whether that's well-timed and more appropriate prescribed fire, or law enforcement or policy type prevention measures. We're going to be doing a session on that as well. Next slide, please. So then that's it for my side of things. And we'll move it over to Mike unless there are some questions before we move on.
No questions?
No questions have shown up yet, so.
Okay, I'll carry on then. So good morning again. So yeah, thanks, Jane. That was a really great overview of your project. So like Jane, I'm working down there in Bolivia. Oh, okay, I see a question, but can wait to the end. Perfect. I'm working with the CC-REA, or the Joint Command for Reaction to Adverse Emergencies of the Armed Forces, and they are kind of fall under the Vice Ministry of Civil Defense. So the next number of slides, I'll kind of go through the project that I'm working on down in South America in Bolivia. Next slide, please. So, as mentioned, the CC-REA stands for the Joint Command for Reaction to Adverse Emergencies of the Armed Forces. I did have a typo here. It was actually formed in May of 2022, but became operational in June of 2022. So as you can see, they were pretty busy in their first year operationally. lots of incidents that they responded to were small initial attack type fires. They did have some larger fires, and their longest deployment was that just over 2 weeks. So kind of a little background and such as, as Jane mentioned in the earlier slides, in recent years, the country of Bolivia has seen an increase in kind of frequency, size, intensity, and complexity of wildfires. So with this, the government realized there was a need/requirement to create a kind of a specialized team to deal with these types of emergencies, not just these emergencies, but various natural emergencies that may occur. So it was decided that they would utilize the military for this role and join a small task force to specialize in fire suppression and responding to other emergencies. Though this unit is full of people wanting to help, it became apparent that they needed proper training to do the job effectively, efficiently, and obviously safely. So thus our involvement with them. So again, this is funded through Global Affairs Canada and managed through Alinea International. As Jane alluded to, it's a program to kind of share technical expertise in various fields to help other countries. Next slide, please. So the CC-REA, which I'll refer to them from here on out, it's just it rolls off the tongue a little better, reports to the Vice Ministry of Civil Defense. As mentioned, it utilizes the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. And yes, even though it is a landlocked country, they do have water courses, rivers, and whatnot. So yes, they do have a Navy. They are mandated to respond to all types of emergencies: fire, flood, earthquake, mudslides, that sort of thing. They basically break down their crews. Their basic crew would be a quadrilla, and that is essentially a 10-person unit with one leader attached to it. If they can't contain the incident, excuse me, then they would call in a UMRE, U-M-R-E, and that is made up of 2 or more quadrillas, and then you would add 1 leader per UMRE. And then if that still isn't sufficient, then they would call in a brigade, and that is essentially 2 or more UMREs, and all basically located from one of the areas broken down across Bolivia. Next slide, please. So in their first year of operation, they did attain some training. The government of France sent over 2 or 3 individuals, and they conducted some kind of command training to this unit last early summer. With that too, they also donated some fireline equipment, some hand tools, and some fireline personal protective equipment. You can see there in the picture, the 2 individuals standing at attention are kind of outfitted in the personal protective equipment that they have. I'll get into some of the equipment they have, but you can see the pump there on the left of the picture. That's the pump that they have. They have only 14 throughout the province, or sorry, throughout the country. So their water moving ability is not great. And with that, they also have very limited wildland hose available to them. They do have chainsaws, which they're attaining more in this coming year and years to come. Next slide, please. So yeah, the equipment, again, their basic fire equipment is very similar to that we use here in Canada. Obviously, not the numbers that we have available to us, but as you can see, they have the fire rakes, they have the Pulaskis. As mentioned in the previous slide, they're very limited in their water moving ability. That's okay. It's certainly able to be worked around. Next slide, please. Again, you can see here they have shovels. they have the water backpacks. Surprisingly to me anyways, I found that they utilize the hard backpacks. They don't have the collapsible ones, but same use. And then also one difference that I don't see a lot of use of in Alberta anyways, only in very certain situations, is the use of fire flappers. And you can see there in the picture on the left, a couple different varieties. One's a collapsible one, and one is the the wooden handle one. Again, don't see a lot of that up here, but certainly very useful tool in those kind of light, flashy fuels like cured grasses and whatnot. Next slide, please. So the next couple slides are just kind of pictures of the terrain. This photo here on this one is just outside of San Paedas, kind of near an old Incan kind of ruins. There was a fire a year and a half ago. Again, very hard to distinguish. It was just kind of on the front facing side of that kind of mountain in the background there. But again, burnt right up to this kind of historic site. They were able to prevent it from kind of encroaching on it. So again, just kind of this slide, and actually if you go through the next couple slides, you just see kind of the type of terrain that they have, very rolling, very mountainous, and lots of lush vegetation. And surprisingly, throughout the country, there's a lot of small kind of plantations or little farming fields kind of scattered throughout on our drive. This area where we were was probably about a 3.5 to 4 hour drive from Santa Cruz. And yeah, there's lots of population all over the country, not just isolated into major centers. Next slide, please. So as Jane, in January, I also traveled down there to do an initial visit. We kind of overlapped a little bit in our trips. So we conducted that needs analysis. We did it in conjunction kind of with the CC-REA and SERNAP. And myself and Jane were there to facilitate that. Several meetings throughout the week. I spent about a week there, 6-7 days there, and met daily with the leadership just to gain a better understanding of the challenges they're facing, the issues that they have down there, with human caused fires, as Jane mentioned. That's certainly a large issue down there, and with the equipment limitations that they have and all that sort of stuff. And the main takeaway that I took from my initial visit was that they're, and I guess I'm not very surprised. I mean, they're a military outfit, so they're very confident and comfortable with kind of commanding and organizing, large numbers of personnel. Where they're lacking is their basic wildland fire tactics and techniques for suppression. So you'll see that their military, they have mandatory kind of enlistment when people turn 18, turn an adult. So, but they only stay in the military for 1, maybe 2 years, whatever the minimum is. Apologies, I don't know that exact number, but then they leave. So there's that constant turnover of personnel that they have available to them, which is why they really want this basic fire suppression kind of tactics and techniques training, so that they will then be able to train all these new enlisted soldiers and military personnel in the years and decades to come. And really, I've had the privilege of kind of, working in South Africa. I was, worked in Australia on wildfires, and really like the techniques and tactics are what I've seen are pretty global. And, the trick is to kind of tailor the training to the tools and the equipment that they have available to them. So next slide, please. So kind of from that visit, come back and in discussions with their leadership of the CC-REA, they determined that they would like kind of a train the trainer program available to the members of the military. And this then again would allow them to carry on this training in-house for the years to come. In doing this training, they're looking at training about 50 personnel. So, it's going to be a large class, and there's going to be kind of a combination of in-class material and then followed up with some field labs or field exercises to hopefully solidify the learning outcomes and objectives laid out in class. And I found, like, in my role as an adult instructor, I guess, a wildfire training specialist, it's certainly a proven way of training. It kind of hits more learning styles of individuals. So yeah, looking forward to it. Next slide, please. So like Jane, I'll be heading back towards the end of March to kind of deliver and meet with their staff and deliver this training. Looking at about a week's long program, again, in class and out in the field. A large focus will essentially be on kind of indirect attack methods. A large chunk will be on ground ignition, using fire to fight fire. Very effective and very kind of efficient in using resources. You can certainly make a lot of good positive ground with far less resources, and also a good focus on hand tool, how to construct proper hand lines, and equally as important, how to maintain those hand tools so that they're going to last and last a long time. That, and coupled with some heavy equipment training and how to work safely and properly with heavy equipment. Next slide, please. So, I found the big challenge is for me in this last month is finding and kind of tailoring the training to suit their needs, and ensuring that the training is focused on the technologies and the tools that they have available to them at their disposal. Language barriers, I found in my initial visit, was a very big challenge. So going back down there, it would be certainly key to have a good real-time translator to ensure that the key messages are being hit and understood by the personnel. And obviously, as with SERNAP and Jane's groups, funding is a huge challenge for these individuals and for this unit. They don't have the budgets that lots of fire agencies have globally. So, I mean, they are relying and they're actively looking for donations and help from other agencies in building their program. And then just the organization, which I kind of tie into the lack of funding. It's very hard to organize and get all the individuals together, especially for training, because it's lots of times they're on their own dime to travel from one area to another. And so, I mean, kudos that they're willing and going to get all these individuals to the same location at the end of March to undertake this training. I think speaks volumes to their commitment in kind of growing their organization and their knowledge in wildfire management in their country. Next slide, please. And then Jane will speak to another component of our trip coming up.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So once I've delivered all the workshops that I'm planning to deliver to SERNAP, Mike and I will join up back in Bolivia for an interagency wildfire coordination workshop. And this is to kind of assist all 4 government entities to learn how to work together better. It'll hopefully address some of the existing difficulties that they have with interagency coordination. They'll learn better how to work with CC-REA, which is newly formed. And we're going to have executive level personnel from all 4 organizations in that workshop. We'll cover some lessons learned in Canada with regards to interagency incident management. So, examples of where it's gone well, where it's been challenging, and then provide some preparedness recommendations as well. And that'll be a 2-day workshop at the end of March. Next slide, please. So this project, though it's very heavily weighted on operational fire management and ecology or protecting the ecosystem and conservation, because it is part of the feminist international assistance policy, it does have other themes, themes revolving around gender equity and social inclusion, environment and climate change, which is obviously the biggest one that is part of this project, but also governance and human rights. Next slide, please. So in terms of climate action and environment, obviously, as we improve the capacity, hopefully we will be increasing landscape resilience to climate change. We'll also hopefully increase capacity for post-burn monitoring and fire management planning and prevention and integrated fire management to help conservation of biodiversity. And then increasing the response and being more effective and efficient will allow the Bolivian government to further reduce the negative impact of wildfire on sensitive ecosystems. And you can see some of the endemic and endangered plants there on the right-hand side. The bottom photo is of a bunch of orchids that are kind of cliff dwelling that were burnt last year. And the other one is a high elevation kind of succulent plant that was also burned last year. Next slide, please. In terms of gender equity and social inclusion, there's currently very low participation of women as park rangers, only 17 total out of the 22 protected areas, and in the military, less than 10%. So we're trying to ensure that women are included in all of the training and workshops, and we're encouraging women in leadership positions so that we can ensure participation in environmental stewardship within their communities. And then personnel within those government organizations will also kind of outwardly teach and train local communities and Indigenous peoples to ensure that they're also have a hand in participation in sustainable land development and wildfire response. And so the photo on the bottom is of a local agricultural producer close to Amboro National Park in Anmi. And he's working directly with SERNAP on kind of ecotourism and sustainable land management. And then on the top photo is one of the women park rangers that I was able to meet in Tunari National Park. Next slide, please. And then lastly, in terms of governance and human rights, many of you may or may not know that more than 50% of Bolivia's people are Indigenous. Most of the park rangers are from local Indigenous or rural communities. And so, they'll take the knowledge that they receive from this exchange back to their communities to increase the capacity and education within the communities. As many of the materials that are possible, I've talked to SERNAP and they will try to translate them into Indigenous languages. Over 40% of the Bolivian population speaks an Indigenous language, so hopefully making those materials accessible. And then in a lot of places, these areas are areas where traditional foods are collected or are really vital to drinking water security. And so understanding how wildfire interacts with the ecosystems will be vital to that kind of sustainability for culture and people as well. And then our interagency coordination will assist all of the government entities to work more efficiently with each other. Next slide. So the next steps, basically, we're on that last little bit, just leading up to the next training trip. And we'll be delivering all the training in Bolivia throughout March. And then we'll have some communication kind of responsibilities to communicate with the Canadian public about what we're doing. And then we'll wrap it up by the end of March. Next slide. So some of the thoughts, these are from Mike. And I would have to concur that, we met like-minded individuals everywhere we went. So no matter where we were, everybody's trying to do the best to get the work done with whatever resources they had. we're both really looking forward to delivering the material and seeing how the capacity increases, and also kind of looking forward beyond that, how things may evolve with all these organizations as well. Next slide. So yeah, we'll complete our reporting and compilation of data. And then after we deliver all the training, we do another competency assessment to see how folks' knowledge about those key areas has increased following the initiative, so that we have a tangible, kind of measurable way of quantifying how capacity is increased. And then, like I said, some communication activities. Next slide. Oh, and then we've got a little video.
Área protegida del Palmar, Chuquisaca, Bolivia, Suyumanta, Tucuy, Guardaparques, Canadá, Suyupi, Carcunapa. Ciao, ciao.
So that video was park rangers from El Palmar and El Palmar, which is near Sucre, the city of Sucre, and those park rangers all speak Quechua, which is an indigenous language, and they wanted to do a video to say hello from El Palmar and El Palmar near Chuquisaca, which is the department or so-called province like we have in Canada, and they wanted to say hello to any park rangers in Canada, so I thought I'd insert that there. Mike, do you have anything for last remarks?
Sorry, I was scrambling for the mute and video button. No, yeah, just, I mean, on that last slide, yeah, it was so nice to see so many people kind of, no matter the challenges, their commitment to kind of, you know, keeping, you know, their forest ecosystems as pristine and productive as they can. Super great to see, and certainly looking forward to returning and seeing how the programs progress in the years to come. I think it's going to be really neat, and I'm really hopeful for the country and their kind of wildfire management program that they're developing. So really curious, and we'll certainly be keeping an eye on them in the years to come. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you, Jane and Mike. That was really great. Sorry for my not so stellar slide prompting. All right, I see, Mike, you answered one question in the chat already. Did you want to speak to that at all?
Okay, there we go. Yeah, no, that message was from Christopher, who was just asking, you know, what could we say, or what could I say was my main learning or takeaway after this initial visit in Bolivian with working with the Bolivians, and what would I do differently at home as a result of the learning? So yeah, and I did answer, but certainly, I mean, I try to keep costs in mind, and I guess I really never thought about, I guess, how fortunate we are here, or I guess our agency is in the funding and the resources and tools that we have available to us. It's just what I know. I mean, this is the only wildfire agency I've worked for, and I guess I never really thought about how fortunate we are. So, I mean, moving forward, I will certainly not take that for granted anymore. Seeing how, you know, the Bolivians are managing it and getting through, even though they have so many hurdles that they need to kind of get around or jump over or duck under and all that sort of thing. So, you know, their fortitude and their resilience is just, it's astounding, and I will take that and certainly try to keep costs in mind and be more diligent with how I am managing fires in not just this upcoming fire season, but for the seasons to come. So yeah, it was really cool.
Thanks, Mike. Jane, did you want to add anything before our next question?
No, I think generally I totally concur with Mike. I think it's really important for folks in Canada or elsewhere to learn how the realities and challenges of different places. I mean, when we went to Australia a few years ago, it's good brain exercise to take fire and put it in a different ecosystem, a different landscape, a different cultural context, and think about what the challenges are and come up with solutions. And I think both of us will probably bring a lot of that back to our own agencies this summer for sure.
Thank you. Freddie, I see you have your hand up. Feel free to unmute if you would like to ask your question.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations, Jane and Mike, for the impressive job you are doing there. And my question is, well, I think I have a couple of questions, really. The first one is related to the assessment that you said. You did capacity needs assessment at the beginning. But in terms of resources, that was also included in your assessment. I mean, the number of people that they have to be trained, the magnitude of the equipment, and those things, because in order to fight for 1 million hectares wildfire, for sure it is not sufficient with a group of 10 or 20 people, right? So in terms of that capacity and in terms of equipment as well, what were the results of that assessment? And the other thing is, have you had some Canadian experience or in terms of the technology that can be applied? Like I know a couple of examples here in Canada that specific technology that could be applied in terms of how to fight in this type of wildfires. So have you had done some sort of assessment to see if this available technology here could be applied in those conditions in Bolivia?
So I guess I'll start, and Jane, you can certainly add on. To answer, no, we weren't when we did the analysis, we weren't speaking, or there weren't questions really relating to the tools or resources they have available. That certainly did come up in discussions with the leadership of the CC-REA, and so they do have a vast number of personnel, men, women, enlisted soldiers that they will have available to them, and that's why they want this kind of to be able to in-house train all their staff as they enter the military to learn how to fight fire properly, safely, and effectively. And secondly, I believe Canada went down, I forget what year, it was a few years ago, and did kind of took a look at some of their aerial firefighting kind of technologies and if they would be applicable in the country. And due to kind of the canopy and kind of the very dense canopies that they have, it was determined that it wasn't, and I guess coupled onto that, the lack of abundant airstrips where air tankers would be able to land. It was deemed that it wasn't really a viable technology to be using down there. Certainly, water is probably the best tool to use. Unfortunately, they're a little limited in the water sources that they have. So, thinking a little outside the box, if you will, that is why we deemed it fitting to kind of focus on more that, indirect attack, constructing, a control line and fighting the fire from there, and hopefully at a more advantageous location to where the fire edge actually might be. I'm not sure if that answered your question on the technologies, or if you're looking for something else, or Jane, if you have more to add, please feel free.
The one thing I would add is in terms of like the capacity building, what we are developing are train the trainer workshops. So I'll be delivering it to 75 SERNAP park rangers who will then deliver that training to additional people, additional communities, all the rest of the park rangers. And so it is meant to be kind of cumulative and like multiplicative. Both the workshops that we're doing are train the trainer ones. So that's how we'll have a bigger reach than just the 75 people that I'm teaching or the 100 people that Mike's teaching. There'll be multiples of those occurring after we're gone as well for kind of sustainability of that capacity.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question. Okay, I see Anna has her hand up if you'd like to unmute and ask your question, Anna.
Yes, thank you for the presentation, Mike and Jen. It was really interesting. I have a question. From my understanding, one of the problems in Bolivia with the fires is that usually they start with certain contradictions with the fire permits that the government grants on some farming activities. In that sense, based on my background, I understand the huge potential for technology in managing wildfires and natural resources in countries like Peru and Bolivia, but at the same time, that great fragmentation of the environmental management across different sectors that also usually involve more and beyond the natural protected areas governance, makes me ask you this question: if you are considering that for your capacity building, there's some involvement of how to perhaps make suggestions for the policy sides for maybe how to bring these issues and make more preventive management of the fires instead of just the reactive when the fire started. How are you envision this? Or maybe this is just out of the scope and you're just working with the park rangers and perhaps the national authorities and no the other authorities that are also involved in how this starts. Thank you.
So I can take this one for my side of the project. We did speak a lot about policy and legislation and penalties and those kinds of things because the park rangers do have enforcement responsibilities within the protected areas. But we did also talk about policies in the neighboring departmental and municipal areas. And so in certain protected areas, SERNAP is working with the departments. So departments for everybody else are similar to our provinces. In the prevention work part of my workshop, I will be talking about institutional and policy type prevention measures in terms of, you know, education, but also speaking to interdepartmental permitting and permitting conditions and monitoring of fuel and fire conditions and linking that to permits that are issued. And then those are also things that Mike and I will be bringing to the interagency coordination workshops as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Jane. And I guess prevention also kind of came up in discussions with the CC-REA. And so, you know, we're thinking about, or I guess I'm thinking about a way to kind of, you know, speak a little just about more messaging to the public in Bolivia. Just, you know, hey, if you have to burn your field or, you know, to get your crops in, or for whatever reason, you know, hey, maybe here's some things to think about when doing so, right? So, you know, I don't know how much policy chat we'll get into and that sort of thing, but certainly we will be touching on some prevention messaging that they can hopefully find useful in the future moving forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Those are great answers and a really great question. Does anyone else have any questions for Mike and Jane? I don't see anything new in the chat yet. We have about 10 minutes left if there are any questions that come up. While we're waiting, I'll ask one. It ties into what both of you have touched on a lot, which is just realizing the resiliency of the people of Bolivia and how they can do so much with less in kinds of ways. And I was wondering if there were any recommendations you could share, because we have a very broad audience on this call. We have people from fire management agencies, we have government employees, we have international aid workers, we have people who work in climate. Is there a piece of advice that you think you could pass on, or maybe even a piece of wisdom that you learned from someone while you were overseas about how to kind of stick to the course working with less? It's a very general question, but
I guess I forgot to mute myself, so I guess I'll go first. I mean, I think, what I've learned, and certainly early on in my career, I took it very personal if I was unsuccessful in, managing a fire and it would grow. But I mean, fires, Mother Nature can be very mean. And I've learned that if a fire wants to take off and run, there's not a lot that we can do as human beings. It will do what it wants to do when it wants to do. But certainly not taking it personal and just having contingency plans, I find is probably the best advice, I guess, that I've learned, and kind of piece of wisdom is going into a wildfire and going in to manage it and knowing that it might not go the way you initially want it to go, but having, a plan A, B, and C, the more the better, in place, so that when things ultimately do go sideways, which they will on many incidents, that you have kind of a backup plan to fall back to and hopefully attain the same end state in another way, kind of thing. So that's kind of what I kind of learned throughout my career, and certainly was emphasized in going to other and working with other agencies that I've had the privilege of throughout my career so far.
Yeah, and I guess for me, I think it's the kind of ability of the park rangers that I met to work with their own local communities and how important those relationships are. They joked, I don't think they were even that joking when they kind of said that, they do everything from, flood preparedness, wildfire, conservation of endangered species and marriage counseling for the communities, because they are from those communities and they're looked up to as leaders. And so I think in a number of the places, their ability to leverage those relationships with the communities so that they aren't the only ones going out to those fires, and hopefully this capacity building will allow them to kind of use more of those volunteers and community members and different agencies support in a more effective way. I think that's kind of, you can be isolated and not have very many resources if you just look within your own agency. But, coming from Parks Canada, which often, has those kinds of relationships with communities and often has fewer resources too, I can totally relate to that as well.
Thank you. I know that was a bit of a general question, but I really like that answer. I really like the answers that both of you gave, but it gets me thinking a lot about efforts within Canada to re-engage with local communities and ways that we could do better with empowering and enabling those communities to participate and lead in so many cases. So thank you for that. I don't see any more questions coming in. I'll give it a last kind of 5 seconds here if anyone wants to raise their hand or post something in the chat. While we wait, Jane and Mike, do you have any last minute things that you would like to say?
I think I'm good.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm good too. Just thanks again for signing up and listening to this project. I know it's, hopefully you all got a little something out of it, and yeah, it was super nice to speak with all of you. Well, thank you both for choosing us to share this through our webinar series. We're very thankful that you chose to use this avenue of sharing. The video is being recorded. It will be posted to our YouTube channel. I did get a few messages throughout the presentation saying people were having some issues getting onto Zoom. So I apologize if you were one of those people that had issues and eventually got in, or if you could please speak to your coworkers and let them know. The video will be on our YouTube channel. I'll work really hard and get it up there today. So if you go to canadawildfire.org, our YouTube channel is linked there, or we're on YouTube/Canada Wildfire, and I will get it up by end of day today. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I wish you both the best success with your return trips to Bolivia and the end of this project, and I hope that it's been very fulfilling for you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.